Surgis.
Thank you. While preparing my verbal testimony for today, I wondered how I could possibly fit 23 years of loss, grief, heartache, and pain into a 5-minute limit. Here lies my attempt. My brother was 20 years old and his girlfriend 21 years old when they were both carjacked, kidnapped, and shot execution style in the head by 5 men that did not know them. The bodies were left, hugging one another, covered in blood, with not one of the 5 men having a shred of guilt or remorse as they drove away in my brother's truck. Carl Jung stated that I am not what happened to me, but I am who I choose to become. Well, I'll tell you that I stand here before you today, not as a victim, but as a warrior who has been placed into this role over and over again. I have now been through 3 compassionate release motions in the last several years, and going through this process for the families of victims of violent crimes just one single time is too much. The ultimate goal, one would hope, during sentencing of violent criminals would be the enactment of a fair, just, and final sentence. Fair sentencing offers punishment to criminals, but it also provides families a peace of mind and an ability to enter into a healing phase of their lives. However, these compassionate release motions, filed years after the fact, repeatedly drag the victims right back to the initial day of the crime and re-victimize all over again, forcing victims and families to pick up the sword to fight. I will tell you that this wears away at our souls. I believe the weight of this burden was a considerable factor in my own father's death in 2018. And in addition, 21 years ago, I was 6 months pregnant with my daughter when I had to testify on the stand for one of the defendants. Today, she sits behind us in the audience, all these years later, still enduring the same nightmare with me, still fighting. How would her life be different if only her uncle had not been murdered? Compassionate release motions for violent criminals should be handled differently than for that of non-violent criminals. I understand that there may be some extraordinary and compelling circumstances for non-violent offenders to be released. However, I ask of you that in cases of murder, violent crime, kidnapping, and sexual assault, that no compassionate release motions should allow to be filed or granted. It must be taken into the consideration the nature of the crime and the previous backgrounds of offenders. In our case, all 5 men that murdered my brother and his girlfriend had previous records, 41 pages of previous records, and 4 out of 5 were out on probation on the night of my brother's murder. I speak today for the families that have unfortunately had the offenders in their cases released. And according to your most recent data report, last year, 87 murderers, 10 kidnappers, and over 1,000 offenders with robbery and firearms charges in the federal system were released. In my opinion, that number is 1,097 too many. There is a 64% recidivism rate, according to your data report, that violent offenders will reoffend. That means that at those percentages, 700% of those that were released, 700 of those criminals that were released last year will reoffend. I ask of you to consider that there must be protection built into these amendments for victims and families that have been affected by these crimes, yet may not still be able to stand up and fight, attend hearings, and write letters pleading to keep violent criminals in jail. If there are no family members left to give statements in relation to violent crimes, does this somehow lessen the original crime? It is extremely difficult for those of us that are left in the wake of destruction which criminals have created to have to worry about the possibility of violent offenders getting out of jail on superfluous compassionate release motions, and 2 of mine that I have been through were superfluous. All of us warriors who are still standing here after tragic events at the hands of another have all been given life sentences. We've all been given a terminal illness, that from which we cannot escape. And there is no extraordinary or compelling circumstance which we can present in order to evade the hell that we have been handed. In closing, I ask of you to have compassionate consideration for all the victims and their families. Allow us to heal and allow us to move forward. Allow us to put behind us the worry of violent criminals being released through the First Step Act. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nice
Thank you,
job,
Ms.
Kelly.
Surgis. Ms.